It really boils down based on my personal experience and working with other clients. It boils down to three things. We have a fear of failure, a fear of abandonment, and a fear of being irrelevant.
Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Jisunny Fisher to the show. Jisunny is a licensed psychologist and a best-selling author of the book, The Bodhi Blueprint. And we're going to talk a little bit about what she has to share from her experiences in writing the book and in her practice. And we get into the aspects of how we can best harness those things that might go out of balance within us and maybe either sow fear, keep us away from our passions. And of course, that's what we're about here at the Eye of Power. And Jisunny shared a lot of good insights. And so I am super, super happy to welcome Jisunny Fisher to the show. Well, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being on, Jisunny. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to get going.
Yeah, and what I really wanted to get into is the anatomy of fear. That's an area that you've studied a good amount on, and we talk a lot about at the Eye of Power is the limiting factors of fear and how we can best recognize and get past some of the dynamics. And I was very intrigued by some of your thoughts on the topic of what it looks like and therefore what we can actually wrestle with and grapple with. So
Mhm.
why don't we just start with your book, The Bodhi Principle, and we'll just go in from there. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you for setting us up for that particular topic because it's something that is definitely near to my heart, which is why I ended up writing a book about it. But when I consider the human journey, the parts of it that makes me really excited to get up, the parts that really tap into, opening up my curiosity, my awe, it really boils down based on my personal experience and working with other clients. It boils down to three things. We have a fear of failure, a fear of abandonment, and a fear of being irrelevant. And through a lot of my work and my studies, I found that those three particular fears very much correlate to how our brain or the anatomy of the brain it looks like within our skulls. So because we've evolved over thousands and thousands of years, when we take a look at our brain inside of our skulls, we see that it's not just like one big glob of brain mass. It's actually, we can see that it's three different parts in terms of not just structure, but also the way that the brain works. So the brain, you can see that it has a core evolutionary purpose of keeping us alive. That's the brain stem. And we can refer to it as a reptilian part of the brain. Over that part of the brain, the mammalian part of the brain then evolved, which is the parts of us that are responsible for things like feeling emotion and being connected to one another. That's the limbic system. And then over that, the most recent brain development in terms of the evolution of the human psyche, if you will, is the neocortex. And that's the human part of the brain that's responsible for things like planning, organizing, thinking through our days, tapping into what we think our life purpose is, everything that you think of when you think of what makes me human. The thing that I love about the way that I was able to see and make these connections between what I can see subjectively or what I can see through experience, what we go through on this particular human journey, and being able to relate that to what I've come to know about the human brain, it really makes me light up to know that that there's that scientific world and the spiritual world, and it meets at a particular intersection, which I love. But this intersection isn't necessarily that the science is proving spirituality or that spirituality proves science, but it's that we're these dimensional beings. I'm going to call it dimensional for just for the sake of our conversation today, but we're multidimensional beings having this particular experience where we have particular needs, human needs, if you will, that need to go about in a way, or that need to be met in a way that helps us to navigate this world with more grace and with more flow. So when I think about the human brain and the basal ganglia, which is the reptilian part of the brain, for example, the part of the brain that's responsible for things like fight, flight, or freeze. So if I am crossing the road with my two dogs and it's dark out, I maybe have my headphones in, which would probably be not just such a smart thing to do on a walk when it's dark out with the dogs, but then out of nowhere, if I see a pair of headlights coming towards us, I freak out. But in my freak out moment, I'm not thinking about what the smart thing is to do. My body will automatically react in a fight, flight, or freeze type of response. And that's just something that happens in a brain where if that reptilian part of the brain becomes activated, the mammalian brain and the human brain completely shuts down. There is like this emergency switch that shuts everything else down because it doesn't matter what I'm going to wear to my social gathering 2 days or 2 nights from now. I need to be alive. I need to survive. So the brain shuts everything else down in order for my resources to be able to put me in a space where I continue or perpetuate survival.
Let me just ask about that for a second, Jasani,
Sure.
because sometimes people feel frozen, or or they're running, or they're fighting over extended periods of time. It might even be years. So the pattern may emerge from the reptilian brain source, but it may persist beyond. Or what goes on there when we get stuck in sort of one of those 3F response patterns?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I think we can delineate or differentiate between chronic stress, which is what we tend to be in a lot of the time, and acute stress. So acute stress is I have this big truck heading towards my way and I need to do something about it. And that's where the fight, flight, or freeze response comes from. That's where it stems from. But when we are experiencing chronic stress, for example, because we have a boss who happens to have a particular perspective that we don't agree with and we continuously clash, and we begin to form these beliefs that our survival is based on whether or not our boss agrees with us, or they can see our perspective, or that we have to match their perspective, even though it goes against what we believe. That chronic state tends to turn on different not parasympathetic, sympathetic systems in our body. So where we are releasing different hormones like cortisol, for example, and that sympathetic state or system that turns on happens to prolong inflammation in our bodies. And a lot, if not all, of the diseases and disorders that we continue to experience have different things in common, like inflammation, for example, and a lot of other different biomarkers as well. Yeah.
So you're talking about like physical, like, inflammation within our physical system. Is there a psychological component to that inflammation, or are you speaking specifically physically?
I think every physical thing that we experience has a psychological component. And
Okay.
vice versa. Every psychological component that we can tap into will always have a physiological reflection. And I think that's where the mind body connection is so extremely important. In fact, we've come to know through the studies and research in psychology that what we imagine, so in our brains, we have these things called mirror neurons. And these mirror neurons, their purpose, their job is for us to be able to subjectively experience something that we might not be subjectively experiencing. And this helps us to understand each other's point of view, for example, because it's really important for our survival and the survival of our species in order for us to like be able to communicate effectively. So if you're telling me a story about how you walked a mile in these really tight, tiny shoes and you have blisters all over your feet, my mirror neurons will kick on so that I can understand what that might feel like. And that ability to do so is extremely important. Actually, science and research is showing that it goes really, really deep in that you can have a group of individuals, set them aside for 2 weeks and have them imagine, practice in their brains working out. So we are doing, you know, different strenuous exercises and strength training exercises, but we're doing it in our brains and we're visually imagining it for 20 minutes. Versus we can have another group of individuals who are doing that same exact thing, but they're actually performing it with their physical bodies. And what scientists are showing that is that at the end of that trial period, you can measure the body mass between the two groups, their different biomarkers like heart rate and cardiovascular resistance and resilience and things like that. And scientists, when they go into this study double blind, they don't actually see the difference between the group that actually physically exercised and the group that just imagined it. So we
That's
have these. Yeah.
that's just an incredible thing. I'm reminded of a story. I forget who it was. I think it's a famous person who was prisoner and they're prisoner of war, and to pass the time in isolation, just remember it was had a golf course they played, so they just played the golf course all day, every day, and
Hmm.
ended up coming back and was a scratch golfer, not being a
That's
scratch golfer before,
amazing.
but yeah.
That is
I
so
mean, not that
amazing,
we'd
isn't
want to
it?
be a prisoner of war, but there is
Hmm.
power in what you're saying there, apparently.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really is that aspect of science catching up to what we already know. And we can call it spirituality, we can call it something else, but our ability to have this extremely intricate connection between the mind and the body is being quote unquote proven. Not that this the world of psychology lives in this state of being able to be in a science where we can't actually prove anything, but to the furthest extent that we can prove through the science of psychology, that body mind connection is so intricate, it's actually being shown how extremely powerful our minds are, which is why I think when Einstein said, well, I don't remember what his exact words were, but how important and powerful the ability to imagine is. He says something about imagination being, a gift greater than intelligence. And I truly think this is where he was coming from or where he was getting to.
Well, another thing along those lines that I've heard recently is the idea of our imagination allows us to experience and experiment with things that might kill us without actually having that physical risk. So it
Hmm.
expands our horizon of possibility umpteen fold. Whereas if we didn't have that imaginary function, we couldn't innovate anywhere near what we do because it'd just be too risky.
I love that. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if that really is what makes us human and what separates humans from other animals on this planet, our ability to explore into the different possibilities, like you said. It's definitely been something that I question and I play with a lot.
It feels like it because it's to me, it's very much related to what we call creativity, right?
Hmm.
I mean, to me, that strikes me as fundamental. Because everybody has a creative impulse and it takes umpteen different forms. But when you're following that impulse, there's something deeply satisfying that's there. And I just don't think things like that are accidental.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we could probably talk about how the creative impulse can be separated or differentiated into two different areas. So
Let's go there.
animals, I feel like animals do have that creative impulse. Their creative impulse looks like giving birth to other puppies, for example. And we also share that, right? We also have that creative impulse to want to create, procreate biologically, which is probably why people are always telling me your clock is ticking. Why don't you have kids yet? But we also have this ability to tap into flow, which I think is a different form of that creative impulse, where I honestly don't know where it comes from, but that ability to sit at the piano and allow this music to come through my fingers, I can't take ownership of. It feels like it's happening not by me, but through me. And I think that's a different creative impulse from the biological one that we just mentioned.
It happens in that way. It happens in sports, right? People are in the zone.
Yes,
It
exactly.
happens in conversations when when you're reaching new levels and you're like, how did we get here? And you never would have gotten there
Mm,
without that flow between two people and mutual inspiration. I mean, and to me, some of these things we're describing, they seem to me like peak human experiences. This is what we're shooting for, right? These types of
yeah.
things.
Absolutely. And the world of psychology, I always butcher his name. I can't even spell it if you ask me to. Csikszentmihalyi? Mihaly, yeah.
Csikszentmihalyi, yeah. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
tough one.
And he really talks about the importance of tapping into flow. Like you said, it's that peak state that we are striving for. And it's definitely a part of, a major part of why positive psychology is, I think, creating this space to tap into studying something other than the biological impulses that we have had as human beings. So when I think about the world of psychology and the way that I was trained in it, it's definitely been looking at how the biological body, the hormones, and evolution or survival has shaped my behaviors. But there is definitely something more than that that happens, I'd like to believe anyway, to me or through me, and why I'm here, or why we're all here. And I think about the we have six core human needs that we are always striving to balance. And each core need has its opposite pair, if you will. So we have three pairs of six needs. And I've noticed that these pairs very nicely tie into the three different parts of the brain that we talked about. So we talked about the triune brain and how the human brain, it's functionally, it has three separate parts that have evolved over time. Now, each pair of human needs very much relate to the fears that we talked about. And they happen to, I think it's because of this the quote unquote reality that we're in right now, to be a very dualistic one. We live in a very polarizing reality. And I think because of this nature, each of the needs tends to be, if you want, polarizing as well, if we don't know how to integrate the two into a nice, like, union of harmonizing quote unquote opposites. So, for example, the reptilian brain, the most primitive part of our brain that keeps us alive, has a fear of failure. If we fail, we die. We cease to exist. That's it. That particular part of the brain, the basal ganglia, and that fear has everything to do with the two opposite needs of needing to be in control. So I need to be in control of my environment. I need to know where I am, because if I'm not in control, then I don't know what particular animal is going to jump out at me and eat me alive. And then we also have that need to be cared for. Sometimes we just want to let go of the control and we want someone to take control of our lives, and we want to be cared for in a way that really does conflict with that need for survival of I need to be in control.
This plays out in our social lives too, right? Whether it be sort of the family structure or the any your local organization, whatever it is, and perhaps your workplace, our society as a whole. We want to have a person that we can like. We don't want to look to a committee. We want to actually look to a person. For most of human societies, that was a king or queen or emperor or something like that.
Yes.
Now
Mm-hmm.
we pretend like our elections give us more control. Doesn't seem to change a whole lot usually, but it gives us at least that illusion that we have that control while we're also being cared for in a way. And that dynamic
Exactly.
is really interesting at every level.
Yeah, exactly. Very well said. And I feel like lately we're seeing a lot of, I mean, politics aside, that is definitely not something I like to enmesh myself too much in conversation, because we can go down a rabbit hole. But politics aside, that need, like you said, Tom, about needing someone to look up to, while we also feel like we're in that sense of control. We've elected that person. Like, we want to choose who our quote unquote gurus are. I want someone who is a guru, or somehow is more elevated than I am, to tell me how to be, to tell me what to do. And I think in doing so, we're actually giving a lot of the power away, which is actually something that we were given as a birthright. to be able to create not just our decisions and our actions based on those particular decisions of what we think our higher commitments or our values are, but also to create the particular reality that we're in. So I relied on my parents to tell me, what this world was like, what I needed to believe, and how this world worked, what happens after we die. As little beings dependent on older adults or bigger people, we tend to give that um, responsibility to that person that is taking care of us. But then once we're beyond that stage, I think I really truly believe we need to cross that rite of passage to determine for ourselves, to reflect and discertain or discern what it is that we truly do believe, what's real, what's not, versus what were we told. And I think that's something that we are coming, as a society as a whole, we're coming to realize is becoming more important than ever.
There's a dynamic that I'm thinking about as you're speaking there, Jisunny, is um, the dynamic between the need for humility, the recognition that what we know might be a lot compared to what we used to know, or compared to other people, but compared to what there actually is to know in reality, it's always a very small percentage. So we need to remain open. We need to remain
Mm-hmm.
in the question. So that's one side, and then the other side seems to be confidence and ability to say, to be able to count on ourselves, to be able to take stock in what our value equation is, and with enough force to move forward, influence people to the better, serve people in ways that only we can, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me like you're pointing to a dual nature there. It seems to be related to this control versus cared for. Is there another level that it's also hits as well?
Can you clarify your question about another level?
I'm sorry, I keep hitting pause there because I have work going on in the house and there's saws
Mhm.
going on. I'm trying to keep it down to a minimum. Um, so specifically, I'm thinking about the other pairs that you might be going towards. So I'm not
Oh,
exactly
yeah,
sure if
sure.
that intersects in just this control, or if there's another one of the pairs that it might
Mhm.
interface in better. That's what I was
Okay,
talking about.
fantastic. So I do love that polarity that you just mentioned. We have the two needs of needing to be humble, right? To lean towards humility, where we're curious and open. But we also have that desire or need to be confident and, for lack of a better word, vain. Vanity is not something that's necessarily bad, but it tends to be bad within context of how we're taught vanity is. So if we're thinking about that polarity of needing to stay humble, but also needing to be confident, that reminds me of the next set of dualistic human needs that more so align with that fear of abandonment. So we have the reptilian brain, and we said over the reptilian brain, over time, we developed the mammalian brain, which is the limbic system. And the limbic system is very much in tune or in control of our abilities to feel and respond to emotions and our abilities to connect to one another. When we realize that that fear of abandonment leads to, or actually opens us up to understanding that we have this dual need of needing to be the same as everyone, but also needing to be special, to be different. This actually takes me back to what you just mentioned, Tom, about needing to be humble and needing to be confident. Being humble essentially is me going, well, you know what? I am going to defer to others, whether it's responsibility or the ability to share knowledge or wisdom. And then being confident is the part of me that wants to tap into, well, I know my things too. I am connected to an inner truth that can speak to something that other people can't, because I'm unique. Everyone is unique, but my ability to own my uniqueness and my specialness also, I feel like it very much mirrors what you were just mentioning, Tom, about this need to be confident. And for as long as I can remember, it might be a cultural thing, it might just be just my particular experience, but I was always taught to be the quiet one, or to be shy, or to listen to my elders, and you're better to be seen than to be heard. So I was very much as a child taught to defer to other people, to be very humble. And so I really did over many years practice what it was like to be the same as everyone. And that need to be the same was blown out of proportion for me in my life. Where, in fact, I remember in third grade, I had moved schools. I had actually moved into a different town. And I remember being cornered by this group of girls who wanted to tell me in third grade, call me a slut because I was wearing a skirt. And I just remember being so heartbroken. I wanted to be like everyone else. I wanted to fit in. And just that type of experience where I want to be the same as everyone was so blown out of proportion. And I really focused on that I completely disowned and threw away this need to be special. And when you have these two needs that need to go together, that need to be balanced, but isn't balanced at all, that particular fear that it relates to, the fear of abandonment, is going to continue to play out in my life very surreptitiously, subconsciously. It's going to continue to present problems for me until I learn to bring back into balance those two polarizing needs that we talked about.
Boy, this is tough work, this whole business called life, right? I mean, figuring this stuff out and a thing that I was just thinking about with the idea of belonging and being part of the group versus standing out and being seen as an individual. I a lot of times when I'm talking about the eye of power, I'm even when I'm coaching individual. I mean, I think we recognize that people do want to be appreciated for the specific person they are. We do want to be seen and be made to feel special. Um,
Mhm,
and so there is no question that that is a strong thread that is in our makeup. And then that need to belong and not be kicked out is super strong
mhm.
too. I mean, that goes back to things like schooling theory. And I heard something not too long ago about why zebras have stripes, black and white stripes. You familiar
I
with that
feel like I
story?
heard that before. Go ahead, please share.
You know, what I thought growing up in the conventional wisdom is, well, it's camouflage, but it really isn't because you can see a zebra a mile away on the you know on the savannah.
Mhm,
So it's not to blend into the background. What it is it's to be indistinguishable amongst zebras in the herd, so that when
yes.
the pride of lions is trying to pick an individual one out, it's hard for them. They lose sight of any
Mhm,
one of them. And only when one has a different gait, it has bleeding, it has when they have something that the lions can grab onto and pick out, that's the one that's
mhm,
going to be that's going to be gotten. And same thing with schools of fish, right? They try to the school of fish is they're trying to be in the center because the center is safe.
mhm,
So these are behavior patterns that move up through. It's probably still, my guess is, because we're talking mammals, you're still in the limbic system there. So some of these things are just in there, and who knows what the dynamic really is, but I think it's playing out in some of the ways you're pointing to, it seems.
yes, absolutely. There is that need to belong and blend into that group of zebras if you're a zebra, but
Yeah.
also wanting to be seen for our uniqueness.
Because each zebra has its own, like, just like a fingerprint, right? No zebra stripes are the exact same. So that's an interesting thing too. So
Yeah,
maybe zebra stripes is a good way for us to think in terms of finding this balance we're looking at here between the same and special.
yes,
All right, so
absolutely.
let's take it to the next level then, to the neocortex level.
Yes. So the neocortex, the human part of the brain, is responsible for our fear of being irrelevant. And when we take a look at this fear, at the core of it, it's this conflict between the need to be selfish and the need to be selfless. There is a desire to serve myself first, but also this competing desire to serve the others, our community. And I think when we think about our society and what we're really drilled in to believe, we're drilled in to believe that serving others before we serve ourselves is some type of virtue. And when we look at it that way, it's such a distorted sense of love because when we serve others before we serve ourselves, it comes with the expectation of needing that other to somehow give back to me. But that's not what love is. And I think because we've been so drilled by society to value being selfless, we don't actually realize when someone who is selfless from a very pure state has already mastered their ability to first love themselves. And so we strive to be selfless. And then we get to the point where we grow resentful, or, the people outside in our lives, whether it's from a family member or a friend, they're not meeting our expectations and we become hurt because we've been drilled with this idea for so long that, okay, we give to others and then they'll give to us. It's reciprocal, but it's not about that. It's first about being able to love yourself, and you are in essence serving and loving others from your overflow, not from pouring from your own cup.
The cliched thing is place the mask on yourself before you assist others, right?
That's right.
An oxygen mask, because you're no good if you can't breathe. And
Exactly.
you need to develop yourself in whatever that unique way is so that you can serve the highest you can, right? So if you flip it,
Exactly.
if I understand your point, Giussani, if you flip it the other way around, you're not going to manifest your best self. You're only
Hmm.
going to stay at a very basic level unless you can
Absolutely.
develop those things that are unique to you, and respect the gifts you're given. I think is what the way sometimes I would frame that. Is that how
Mm-hmm.
same path?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And
Respect the gifts that you're given. Hmm.
and a lot of times people are and maybe there's a little bit of an illusion that can come up there, because perhaps my gift is that I'm selfless, or my gift is that I don't think about myself and I'm oriented towards others, and perhaps that is a gift and an orientation that can be nurtured, developed, and allows you to do things that other people might not do.
Hmm. That gift, I think, comes with the premise or the foundation that you know how to nurture yourself. Or maybe you were born with an ability to automatically and effortlessly nurture yourself, and therefore you're able to give to others. But we know that that's actually not a gift that you're born with and you are nourishing if you experience things like resentment or you feel hurt because someone didn't meet your expectation.
So if there is an expectation, or if there is an uh, you feeling like you're making deposits that need to be returned, how
Yes.
selfless is it really, is the point there then.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I truly do believe that selflessness only can come in a pure way, not a distorted way, from our overflow.
From the overflow. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's what you see in the world. You typically see that, right? Where people, the the people that are very, very accomplished, a lot of times they're super, super generous.
Yes.
And you know,
Hmm.
they've they've reached a place where it's not, all the boxes are basically checked, so they're looking for that next box.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that definitely is reflected in the ability for them to give back, right? The charity. But I'm sure there are lots of people who are materialistically, if you will, accomplished, but their relationships are a complete shit show. It's
oh,
because they
of
haven't
course,
balanced. Yeah.
that's the antagonist on a lot of most TV shows and movies. I'd say I've watched. That's because that's a trap that we can fall into, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so those three areas that correspond physiologically to the makeup of our brain and those dynamics, is that are those the foundational elements of wrestling with when we're trying to build ourselves up and grow past a point? So I'm thinking specifically about in the case of in high power parlance, that'd be the pain quadrant, where the primary factor we're trying to get over are various forms of fear or the
Mm,
unwillingness to sacrifice certain things that need to go that aren't compatible with the new vision of ourselves. Um,
mm.
so are those dynamics that we just talked about, are those the main pieces that we face in that struggle, would you say, when we're facing
I think
fear?
it's Yeah, I think it's definitely the first part, but I do want to put a disclaimer out that what we just spoke about with the different parts of the brain and the three fears and the six human needs, for me, it's theoretical. I haven't been able to put into research or prove in the lab, if you will, that these particular parts of the brain are responsible for these core fears. But it's based on my personal experience and my many years of working with clients that I found that anything and everything that we're struggling with always falls into one of these three fears. And I just, through the years of actually really contemplating, it does fit in so nicely that I can't perceive it to be anything else, but I'm sure we'll continue to evolve that idea anyway. But I just wanted to put a disclaimer that I can't physically show you on the brain if I get like a map of your brain, that these three fears are located in these parts of the brain. But it just does fit in very nicely with what I was trained in and what I've come to see in my particular practice. Now, any type of problem that we're having, so if you are in any way suffering, I do notice that it falls into any one of those fears. And I can actually help you pinpoint why you're particularly having that specific struggle, because we can definitely see that there is an imbalance in one of the three pairs of the human needs. And I think once we come to the point of understanding what the six human needs are, that checks off that box of self-awareness. Once we are aware of ourselves in this way, we can then move on to the next phase of our human, or what should we call it, our ability to transcend or to push beyond our boundaries, is the self-realization. And I truly do believe when it comes to life purpose, you, Tom, I, and anyone else that I've come to know, everyone has the same life purpose. And it's in so many different shades, but the same core component of life purpose is for self-awareness and self-realization. And we know that we are on the right path towards self-awareness and self-realization once we can see, we can measure, do we have three things? I've come to find people who are successful have a sense of peace that is transcendent. They have a sense of authenticity. They are able to express themselves in a way that other people might be afraid to, or they dare to do the things that other people have been afraid to do. And then the third thing is clarity. So when we're on the right track, we will have a sense of peace because we're balancing the need to be in control and the need to be cared for. We will have a sense of authenticity because we have balanced the need to be special with the need to be the same as everyone. And we will experience a sense of clarity in our lives that's really indistinguishable from others, or distinguishable, not indistinguishable from other senses of, oh, I think I know myself, or I think I know what I want to do. This like crystal clear clarity comes because you've been able to balance the need to be selfish and the need to be selfless. So peace, authenticity, and clarity are three things that I've come to find in a lot of individuals who are on the right path. And no one has their life in a perfect order, like everything is perfect, right? It doesn't matter how achieved or successful you are. No one is perfect. No life is perfect. But you know you're on the right track because you have those three things: peace, authenticity, and clarity.
And you're and they're somewhat directional or aspirational in the sense that you can have degrees of turbulence, right? So it can be people are on edge all day long every day, or I can be mainly calm, but this one thing bothers me, or some
Mm-hmm.
point in between. Um, the word that Don Miguel Ruiz uses in the Four Agreements. Are you familiar with that book?
Yes.
He uses the word imperturbability, which I really love that concept, where you're just grown to the place that you're solid and you're sort of observing the world around you, and your
Mm-hmm.
waters really cannot be disturbed once you're at a
Mm,
certain point of development. And I think that's a nice aspiration. And I believe that that has those components of what you were just describing there. Imperturbability has
mhm.
those components.
That's beautiful. You
Yeah,
know, and when you said that, the image, Tom, that came to my mind was a very deeply rooted tree. So
mm,
the higher your branches want to grow towards the heavens, they say the deeper your roots must go.
mhm,
So it
yeah,
doesn't matter what type of storm comes your way, the deeper your roots are. And someone said this quote, I don't remember who, how. The higher you want to go towards the heavens, the deeper towards hell your roots need to reach.
hmm,
And it really does reflect for me the ability for someone to or experience extreme pain and distress is their capacity to experience joy and enlightenment. This is, I believe, why when we see like great figures in history and in our leadership, when we think of the really successful, achieved, um, fully self-actualized individuals, we always hear their backstory of how much distress and pain and trauma they've experienced. And I really do believe that the capacity for an individual to experience that trauma is also their capacity to experience joy. So if you haven't had the ability and or maybe the opportunity yet in your life where you've experienced something so excruciating, then you wouldn't be able to reach towards the heavens. And if that's where you feel like you are, well, I don't know that I've experienced any specific really bad trauma. I really do highly encourage individuals to look deeper. It's typically because you're not looking deep enough. You don't have to have been, I'm sorry if this is going to be a triggering thing, but have been raped or have been in war or a victim of war to have experienced trauma. We all have that particular area of our lives where we need to understand. So, what I'm coming to realize, Tom, is that every human being comes with this responsibility to cross the rite of passage. And our rite of passage is to experience struggle. Now, some human beings have the ability to take the struggle and channel it. They know where they want in their lives to feel the struggle, and so they experience passion versus someone who has that same rite of passage and struggle, but they don't know how to directionalize their struggle. And so instead of passion, what they're experiencing is suffering.
that to me strikes me as something very profound. So what you're saying there is that suffering and passion aren't so far apart, and really it's a matter of how you're framing the dynamic of what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. Not just framing, but channeling it to a
Channeling.
different. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I could be going through a time in my life where I am really suffering because I feel overweight, I feel unattractive and unworthy, and I'm experiencing a lot of suffering. And I'm going, what if I could only lose 100 pounds? I'd be so happy, right? That's suffering. I could take that same individual and we could work to channel that struggle because we all have to struggle. It's wired within us. We need struggle. If I can then take that individual and help them channel that particular struggle into a different arena of their lives, then that 100 pounds doesn't matter. It comes up naturally. But instead, they're really focused on experiencing that struggle as I'm building a business and I'm going to stay up till 4 in the morning, even though my partner is coming out going, what are you doing up still? But that quote unquote, what could have been suffering is now, no, I'm passionately creating this business that I believe in, that I really want to birth into this world. So we all have to struggle anyway. It's just the rite of passage of this human journey. Do you choose to intentionally direct it where you want to experience passion? Or will you channel that energy, or will you allow that energy to go? Well, if you're not going to choose where I'm going to go, I'm going to choose where I'm going to go. And that struggle is going to choose different areas of your life that now you're calling suffering.
And is that the one of the lessons from your book, The Bodhi Blueprint? Is that in that as a wrap?
That's a great question. It probably is, but I didn't word it in this way.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's a very profound thought. And I mean, we're both in a similar kind of lane in life where we're trying to help people shorten learning curves, stay in the suck less time than they otherwise might have to.
Mm,
Um, and you've got some things you've generously shared with us here that help people do that. And that framing that you just gave is one where what I take away from that is that no matter where you are, the appropriate attitude is one of acceptance and gratitude, because it even the things that are painful come with gifts, right? That if it's nothing more than expanding your ability to appreciate, um,
hmm
or your capacity for joy, or that suffering, or that whatever that negative thing that we don't like
hmm
has in it seeds of uh, all things have that dual nature that you've been pointing to all along here. And let's just accept it and then not waste energy, crying foul, or thinking that it
hmm
should be something that it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. That saying comes to mind. What we resist persists. And I think a lot of our suffering does perpetuate because we put up such a resistance to what we're experiencing.
Yeah, it's an energy flow, right? It's so if we stop the flow, it's going to just sit there and accumulate and get acute.
Hmm
Yeah. So, well, wow, what a conversation! I really love really loved how this went. Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
Yeah, my
This is
pleasure.
wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jisunny. Appreciate you being on with me today. I like the fact that we were able to identify some things here, the three basic fears that correspond in our triune brain, the reptilian brain being primarily where we fear failure, where, we can interpret failure as a matter of life and death. And then as we move forward into the mammalian or the limbic system, that's where our feelings towards our social connections come into play. So our fear there is of abandonment. And, we want to get a sense of belonging there. And then to the neocortex, that which what we consider makes us human, our biggest fear there is being irrelevant. At the base level, we tend to react with very basic sorts of responses, such as the fight, flight, and freeze response. And as we go up in our evolutionary model, so to speak, um, there are six core needs that emerge in three pairs. Um, and they're sort of these are dipoles, and it's this dualistic nature we really need to balance, right? So what Jasuni identified was um, control being um, be, our sense of control, wanting to control things, versus a sense that we really like to be cared for and we feel like we need to look up to somebody. Um, and then in the limbic area, that aspect of being the same, in other words, belonging and being part of a group that we have identified characteristics with, versus being special, that being seen as the unique individual we are. And then finally, at the neocortex level, um, and the fear of being irrelevant, it's selfish versus selfless. And Chisani talked about really needing to be selfish first, where we're feeding ourselves and developing those gifts that we have so that we might serve other people with our best. And that made sense. And then we finally wrapped up our conversation talking about purpose. And Chisani's definition of it is a little bit different than what we talk about at the Eye of Power. They're not incompatible, but she identified specifically about being self aware and self realized as a part of really feeling this full sense of purpose. And as you know, the ideas that we talk about here for purpose in the Eye of Power is the idea of contribution in the way that only we can, by developing those skills that we can and contributing to others as a way of fueling that piece of purpose. But I really think that her idea of how do you know you're there, or what's it evidenced by when we feel purpose, and she talked about peace, authenticity, and clarity as those attributes that correspond to a developed sense of purpose. And I think those are very good things that we can all aspire to, and maybe take a little bit of a temperature in our own lives to see where we are along those lines, to refocus where it is that we're putting our energies. That she mentioned like a rite of passage as it relates to um, our nature, and that we really do have to come to grips with the fact that our struggles can go in two different directions. When we struggle knowingly, that becomes passion. And when we struggle with the unknown, that becomes suffering. And I thought that was a really interesting way to frame uh, how we can sort of grip and wrestle with our direction and our sense of agency in the world. So altogether, I thought this was a fantastic conversation, right down the middle of the plate as far as the Eye of Power topics are concerned. So thanks again, Jisunny. Appreciate your time and your wisdom. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Let's go.
This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com